Good morning or afternoon, depending upon where you are. Welcome to Venable's first animal health webinar. We're grateful for your attendance. My name is Chuck Morton, and it's my pleasure to be with you today on the first of a series. This is entitled, Where is Value Being Created? Joining me today are Jim Nelson and Nancy Zimmerman. Jim, why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Chuck. I appreciate everyone joining us today. I'm a partner in the San Francisco office of Venable. Having worked in the animal health space for quite some time, I do corporate work and am co-head of the technology, media, and commercial work, so inbound, outbound licensing, and other exploitation of intellectual property.
Nancy?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I appreciate the Venable team inviting me to present to you all today. I am a veterinarian by training. I was in private practice for 10 years and then spent 5 years in medical leadership for a large corporate practice in the US. And then I've been in the pharmaceutical space for veterinary products for the last 15 years. And currently I've been at DECRA for 13 and a half years through various commercial roles. And now I lead the business development and external innovation for DECRA. So, and we've had used Venable multiple times over the years, and they've been great partners for us. So I'm pleased to be here to help talk about animal health.
Nancy, thanks. And for my part, I am an M&A and finance lawyer active in the animal health space, particularly in the consumer products piece of that space. And we'll be with you today talking some about the sort of state of the market. But as I mentioned, this effort is part of a multi-part series, which will include presentations from lawyers from throughout the firm, including a January presentation on veterinary device issues, and in particular the regulatory schemes around those, where our colleagues in DC with FDA Insight, Todd Harrison and Justin Cohn will be speaking. In February, we'll learn about new product development and acquisition in the from an IP perspective with our colleague Chris Borrello in our IP litigation and life sciences practice in New York. In March, we'll turn to ways to navigate enforcement risk in the arena with speakers Valerie Cohen in New York and Warren Hamill in Baltimore. And in April, we'll turn back to transactions, and we'll hear again from Jim and from our colleague Bill Haddad in New York. And then wrapping things up in May with the presentation relating to the rise of failure to warn claims, an emerging area of interest. And we'll hear from our colleagues Kathleen Hardway and Jason Rose, both in our Baltimore office, who are active in their products liability and mass tort space. But for all of these sessions, we're going to use a fictional company called TriPaw to try to create a context around which to facilitate some of these discussions. Let's see here. So there we go. And Jim, do you want to just talk briefly about that?
Happy to help. On the company side with TriPaw, so we've created this fictional company, as Chuck notes. Conveniently for our efforts, it covers a lot of ground. TriPaw is a company that has a multidimensional approach, all in the animal health space, so only animal health, but it offers products and services, and it goes to market through multiple channels. We're going to get into the details of those later in this discussion, just to talk about what's going on within the various sectors of the animal health space and the go-to-market efforts. So stay tuned as we explore TriPaw later in the discussion.
So with that, let's turn our attention to the global animal health market. I expect all of you who are listening are here because you appreciate both the breadth and depth of this particular market. When we say animal health, we're talking about a wide array of industries, including those that consist of companies focused on research and development, manufacturing, animal-related consumer products, care of animals, such as veterinary practices, and the sale of pharmaceuticals and biologics. The top 10 animal health companies nearly tripled in value between 2013 and 2023. The top 10 companies valuation grew from 55 billion to 143 billion, almost a 3x increase. And it's a market that by 2030 is expected to be over $110 billion. This is in part fueled by something that probably many of us have witnessed, and that is the humanization of pets, where pets are an increasingly important part of many people's families. And that leads to a willingness to make certain investments that might not have seemed so likely in the past. There are clearly regional breakdowns in growth. The core animal health market has achieved a compounded annual growth rate of 5.4% over the past decade. It's been driven by the introduction of many blockbuster products. The US, not surprisingly, is currently the largest single market, but international markets are growing even faster at a rate of 6.1% over the last 10 years. And growth is expected to continue, although slow, over the next 5 years, with fewer new products that are expected to launch. There is, in this space, like in so many other spaces, growing interest by private equity. Between 2017 and 2022, for example, the PE firms invested more than $45 billion in veterinary deals alone. In part, this is fueled because this was viewed at least once as recession-proof. There was recurring revenue to be had, lots of high growth potential. And the active private equity investors include L. Catterton, NovaQuest Capital, Cortec, KKR, Shore, Silver Lake, TSG, among others. And we've been lucky enough to work with a number of these groups. And their investments have covered lots of different types of companies, really the full array of private equity fueled or full array of animal health related businesses.
Hey, Chuck, it might be worth injecting at this point too. Part of the thing we see here, and it leads to some of the private equity moves, is the parallels that have been going on between animal health and human health. And that is in the human health space, we obviously have seen, particularly on more kind of personal clinics and otherwise, investment on the delivery side, and then certainly on the innovation side as well. So I think it's been over time an ability to kind of see in some areas, and Nancy and we'll get into this in some detail, but how the human space has been front running a bit for the animal space as to where investment's coming from, where innovation is occurring, and how go-to-market strategies are evolving.
Nancy, I'm assuming you've seen that at DECRA.
Yes, definitely.
I see it even in places like pet food businesses, where the pet food marketplace, particularly the treats, seems to be evolving in ways that certainly mirror, in many instances, human food products. The veterinary care delivery evolution has been a big part of the story as well, with a lot of consolidation. Right now, 22% of vet clinics are part of corporate chains. The chains are the strongest in the coastal states, but that enables those chains to have greater purchasing volumes and sophisticated procurement pricing strategies. Often they're able to adopt apps and other technologies that can make interfacing with them a little bit more convenient than it may be otherwise. And those have reflected the evolving goals of veterinarians in terms of what they would like to do to spend their time. And while there has been this incredible consolidation, that consolidation currently is slowing. There are growing regulatory pressures, and there's been stagnation in pet growth. But this has really been a defining feature in the recent past. And I know Nancy, you've had some personal experience in this arena. I think it may be interesting for folks to hear about your insights as it comes to this particular piece of the story.
Yeah, I think, globally, there's other countries that have had a lot higher rate of consolidation than the US. The geography, as Chuck mentioned earlier, the coastal states that tend to have more concentrated urban and suburban areas, and they are easier to corporatize and have central leadership over top of multiple clinics that are within, an hour to 2 hours driving distance for that central leadership to have oversight of multiple locations. So our central US is much harder to corporatize because of the distance between large urban and suburban areas. And I do think that the consolidators are also starting to run out of what they would consider viable hospitals to integrate into their programs. So they like to see 3 to 4 plus doctor hospitals, so that the customer isn't reliant on constantly seeing Dr. Smith. They're used to seeing Dr. Smith, Dr. Jones, and 2 or 3 other veterinarians in that practice. So consolidators don't really like to purchase one doctor hospitals because a lot of the value of that hospital is in that one particular personality of that particular veterinarian. And so as the consolidators have consumed all of the 3 to 4 doctor hospitals, now they're looking at 2 doctor hospitals. And so at some point in time, that's also causing a little bit of the slowing of the consolidation. But it'll take the US, a country like the UK, where there's almost 80 to 90% consolidation, because geographically it's simpler. The US, I think, will always be a little bit slower and have less consolidation than some other smaller countries.
Interesting. The in addition to the evolving trends in the veterinary world, there are other overarching R&D and innovation changes that are happening as well, including the application of cutting-edge biotechnology and startup-driven innovation to the space. We have, and you'll hear more about this in later parts of this series, an active practice really focused on the biotechnology innovation and all of the patent-related efforts in that field. For those of you who are listening who are part of large companies, you're certainly aware of these things. And these efforts, in many cases, follow similar efforts relating to human health, both in the development of the technologies and how they end up being adopted. So right now, we're seeing a lot of activity around endocrinology, neurology, gastroenterology, as well as oncology beginning to emerge for pets and other animals. And that growth really depends simply on the scientific results, and we're starting to see much better results in those areas. Nancy, I'm curious to hear your insights from Dechra's perspective on some of these particular innovations.
Yeah, well, we are obviously a fan of the endocrinology space. Most of the disease conditions are well understood in both humans and animals. They're treated very similarly between humans and dogs and cats and even horses as well. And so endocrinology has been a big focus for Dechra, based on our portfolio that we currently have, and then our portfolio that's in development as well. And oncology is an interesting space in animal health because, for people, when we extend the life of a person by 5 or 10%, that's a pretty large number in terms of years of increased lifespan. When we increase a dog or a cat who have a 12 to 16-year lifespan, when we increase their life by 5%, it's not as meaningful. So the Chuck's point here about the fewer side effects is absolutely hugely important, because we don't want the rest of that animal's life to be spent taking a drug that is highly intolerable to both the patient and the pet owner, to deal with the side effects or the difficulty of the administration. So oncology is one of those spaces where it's got to be the right technology with the right outputs, like Chuck has mentioned here. So it's a huge opportunity. We just always have to weigh the risk of the treatment versus the benefits because of the shorter lifespan of a pet. And sometimes, we also have to be aware that, are we extending the life of the pet for the pet? Or are we extending the life of the pet for the pet owner? And there's a touch of an ethical push-pull kind of a concept there that we always keep in mind as a pharma company when we look at an oncology drug.
Interesting. So you have that sort of whole innovation-driven development of the market. You also have changes in sort of the sources of capital and the capitalization of these companies. So you've got ownership shifting from pharma divisions to standalone animal health leaders. The public standalone animal health companies now represent almost 2/3 of the market, 63%. Obviously, private equity continues to grow. They have a significant presence among the top 50 animal health companies. They also continue to acquire animal health companies. The expanding role of private equity across lots of different industry verticals certainly finds its way here. And many of these acquisitions are in large companies that are likely to transition to public ownership through IPOs, at least if the market sort of returned to some of the growth that we saw in the not too distant past. But in addition to those sort of larger companies, there's also a ton of innovation being driven by startups. And as they continue to bubble up and become slightly more mature, they're expected to become acquisition targets for larger animal health companies, and perhaps even to become acquisitive themselves. So it's an extraordinarily dynamic market. Lots of different things are happening. And one of the sources of these evolutions are certainly the evolution of channels, the way things are going to market. So what we're observing is an increasing shift towards online and e-commerce segments. They're expected, obviously, to have the highest growth rate. They're challenging some traditional sales models, including retail sales. Here, as in other areas, traditional retail is under a lot of pressure. This area is particularly attractive for e-commerce sales because of the recurring nature of many of the sales. And often you're talking about larger products that are getting delivered. So there are lots of things that make this particular sector susceptible of e-commerce disruption. Online pharmacies are another example of that. They are transforming prescription fulfillment, and manufacturers are moving to direct sales. So these various changes in the way these products are going to market is fueling some of the disruption. Nancy, again, I'll throw it to you for a moment to see how DECRA is is seeing these sorts of changes.
Yeah, I think like a lot of other industries, we are looking at how do the younger generations than my generation like to receive information, receive products, schedule appointments, all of the things that as technology is developed for other industries, how can the veterinary industry take advantage of that? So both as a pharmaceutical company, is there different ways that the pet owners who utilize Dekra's drugs want to receive information, and traditionally pet owners have not interacted with pharma companies, so is there a way in the future where we can help the veterinarian help assist with the pet owner communication and compliance? Compliance is an issue for all medications, whether you're a human pharma company or a veterinary pharma. Most of our products are for the treatment of chronic disease, and we want to make sure that that pet continues to receive the product in an appropriate fashion with the appropriate follow-up. So are there ways that we can help facilitate the veterinarian to increase the compliance of the pet owner in administering and refilling those products? So I think for us as a pharma company, if we could sort out the compliance, that would be one of our main targets. But also then just sort of this ease of how pet owners can access our drugs, obviously within the regulatory spectrum of prescription drugs. Is there an innovative way that doesn't harm the veterinarian and the veterinarian's practice? Is there an innovative way to help get product direct to the consumer?
Interesting point. And the point that we're trying to make with the last bullet about transparency is creating the need for scale, that's a corollary to the growing importance of the e-commerce segment, where it's very easy for the consumer to price shop, and that creates pressure on margins, and that, from our observation, is creating a need for scale, um, which is just part of the maturing nature of the industry and that particular sales channel. So it's all of this disruption all happening at the same time. So what's being sold, how it's being sold, how it's being created is all fueling this particular industry, and why, from our perspective, it's such an interesting industry to focus on, and why it requires an interdisciplinary legal approach to address the market and to help our clients navigate it. So if you are interested in receiving CLE that is available, Jim, if you could share the code, please.
Value 2025. So the code is value 2025.
Okay. So that hopefully sort of sets the stage for this multi-part series, and gives us a chance to turn our attention to the more granular challenges that face our model company, TriPaw Health, for which I will turn the conversation over to Jim.
Thank you, Chuck. So picking up with TriPaw, as we lightly mentioned before, and we'll speak a little more too as we lead into this next section. But TriPaw Health is in a variety of sectors and is going to market in a variety of ways. So they're really soup to nuts, in that they do everything from nutrition and general everyday care, think shampoos and grooming and other things along these lines, to vet services, and then prescription therapeutics. Obviously, quite a bit of breadth compared to a little more of the segmentation, but TriPaw is, if anything, audacious and going broad in its efforts to get to the marketplace. And then picking up on what we've said before, and speaking to some of this on a personal basis also, it's looking to go to market through consumer, retail, and veterinarians. In some of that exchange with Chuck and with Nancy, I think I'll also observe as someone who is a pet owner at a young age, or in a family with pets, that the vet used to be central to the ecosystem. It seemed you went to the same vet, you had the same kind of jumping off point for the needs, and now there's a lot of diversification that's coming about how to reach the consumer, as we've discussed thematically. TriPaw at its core is trying to figure out how to expand along with that. And I think, as Nancy's pointed out too, recognizing that different generations may perhaps have different ways that they'd like to consume the needs in and around their pets, primarily recognizing, I guess, balance of needs between I'm used to being on a platform just in time and convenience compared to the trusted vet advisor of my youth. So to that end, I will also note we're primarily going to be speaking to or addressing things from a companion animal standpoint. TriPaw's core business in the companion space, obviously, livestock and other animal healthcare is out there as well, be it genetics or other things that deal more with on the agriculture side of things. This is going to be primarily companion. So in sum, for what the offerings are, and we're going to discuss them in a little bit more detail here. We have TriPaw Therapeutics that's working on innovation in the drug and biologic pharmaceutical space. We've got TriPaw Veterinary, so they actually are looking to operate clinics and hospitals and provide care to the pets and supportive pet owners on the front line. We've got TriPaw Nutrition, so in the food, treat, and supplements. Again, some parallels with human, where it's not just ordinary food and water these days. There's more available. And then TriPaw Animal Care that goes more to the devices and other things, noting that there's a bit of a opportunity with the technology to be being more customer centric and being able to be stickier, if you will, in the connection with pet owners and the animals, as well as providing better care. And then the primary distribution channels that we're going to be talking about are through direct to consumer, primarily e-commerce, retail partnerships, so areas where it could be with other retail establishments and or existing pharmacies, and then in the vet space, where it would be sales directly through come in, have your pet treated, and have the ability to buy goods and services at that time through the vet. So with that, let's focus a bit. TriPaw is interested in trying to grow value, grow the breadth of the portfolio, as well as the stickiness and permanence of the portfolio in the therapeutic space. So to this, I think, Nancy, I guess I'll come to you on for emergence of animal medicines. We've spoken a bit on the linkage or analogs in the human space, but you've got obviously tremendous knowledge, experience. How are you seeing the animal health medicine space? Where should we invest? What should we develop? How do you look at that?
Yeah, well, I think all of the pharmaceutical companies, we look at sort of different opportunities. There's always the unmet needs. We have not delivered a appropriate therapeutic for every disease condition that exists in dogs and cats at this point in time. So our internal teams will look at what are the unmet needs, and then our R&D team and myself look at, well, what are the technologies potentially out there in the human sector that are addressing, renal disease is a great example in cats. We don't have a lot of therapeutics yet in that space, and it's a very common condition that would rise to the market value level that we would be able to invest in drug development. But it's still kind of an area in human medicine where I would say there's still a lot of opportunity, and they haven't 100% been able to help patients with chronic kidney disease short of dialysis. And so we often, when we identify that unmet need, we often look to human medicine and see if there's been a solution derived there. Years ago, quite a few of the animal health companies were owned by a human health parent. And then the veterinary R&D team and the human health R&D team could have direct collaboration and conversations on what's worked, what might work. And as a lot of those human companies have spun off their veterinary division, that linkage internally it has evaporated. And so now most of us as veterinary pharmaceutical companies are looking to these innovative startups who have a very niche technical expertise in one particular area, whether it's monoclonal antibodies, gene therapies. Some of the companies look at mRNA therapeutics. So we look a lot now to these very small startups who are specialists in what they do in that emerging technology. Because most of us as animal health companies do not have an internal, what I'll call benchtop discovery. That tends to sit outside at the universities or at these small startup companies. So, and then the other way we think about what new areas should we invest in, we look at what are the large markets that have already been built that we could maybe deliver a better therapeutic for. So preventive medicine has a large market value right now for animal health companies. But then we look at that and we say, what is the barrier to either efficacy or safety or compliance with what's currently being offered? And how could we maybe through new technology address one or two or more of those current barriers and make a better offering that's already in a space where we know the market value. So those are kind of the two ways so we either tend to look for unmet needs or we tend to look for existing large market opportunities that can be improved upon.
That's terrific. I think maybe on the next slide, we can talk a little bit then on the nutrition side, which has a bit of convergence with the traditional pharmaceutical space. So I think if we advance one, Chuck, we can look to considerations. Mindful here, it's related, so I think probably just a short coverage on what we're seeing in the evolution of it's not just food and water anymore, if you will.
Yeah, I think a lot of science has moved to nutrition as medicine. Are there things that we can alter about a diet, a better protein level or a different protein, or the microbiome is a large discussion in human medicine. We're starting to find a connection between the bacteria in the gut and depression and people and chronic inflammation. So I think that microbiome is how do we keep it healthy for our young patients so that we can potentially avoid disease development later on in their life. But for those patients who already have an existing disease, is there a way potentially through managing the microbiome in the gut, a way to help improve them, their current disease state? So there's a lot of interest in that area. There's also a lot of interest in what is a more natural or whole food type approach that can be offered to pets. I still to this day can remember being a young child and walking through the A&P store in Pennsylvania, and there was a cow can of horse meat. And even as a young child, I was like, well, that's weird. I didn't know and but you don't see that anymore, but that was in the 70s. Most people don't imagine feeding something to their pet, that they would not eat. So when they look at an ingredient list and they see something like chicken byproduct, they're very offended by an animal nutrition company putting an ingredient in that sounds terrible. So there's a lot of innovation, I think, around the space of how do we, in an affordable manner, provide nutrition to our pets that equals what we would want to eat ourselves.
Great. And I think with that, also, we've got the notion, again, paralleling the human side of what are the claims made. And otherwise, I know we've got folks that'll be speaking subsequently. But when you're going to make a statement about how there may be probiotic characteristics, it's an interesting area for the animal health industry to be moving into, with the notion of suggesting that there's a return, and if there's not, then the consumer might be upset.
Yeah, and then the regulators as well. We want to always ensure that we're not crossing the lines with CVM. There are AFCO is another regulator. Each state has their own nutritional regulators for both livestock feed, but also they anytime DECRA wants to launch a treat or a dental therapy, we often find ourselves needing to discuss that with state regulators, and then you have to figure out how do you have one product and one marketing message that is appropriate for all 50 states. And so that's always a big challenge. But yeah, interestingly enough, Jim, the European agency, so EMA, just approved a cat food that both nutritionally works for cats with chronic kidney disease, but then it also contains a prescription drug actually within the kibble. And that is the first, what I will call true prescription food. So currently in the US, a lot of the nutrition companies identify their diets sold by veterinarians as prescription diets, but legally they're not prescription diets. But this one that just got approved in Europe will legally be only available by prescription. And so it's an interesting foray. It's a competitor who did it, but I'm just super excited to see how that works out for patient care, because it's a great way to fix the compliance problem, as long as the patient has an appetite that day.
I was going to say that. Yeah, I think for anyone who spent time trying to get a dog or a cat to consume a tablet or other items, it sounds appealing.
Yeah.
So what about the I think next slide, Chuck? We can go to devices and other moving to the hardware side of the house, I guess, on a simple basis. What are we seeing, or how have you been watching the industry evolve there, Nancy?
Yeah, a lot of the wearable devices that are available right now are very interesting, but their value statement doesn't always deliver on what a pet owner would expect, and it definitely doesn't deliver on what a veterinarian would hope that these wearable devices can tell us. Just like I bought the Apple Watch a couple of months ago. It's really kind of fascinating. I kind of like it, but there's not a lot of science when it first came out around the 10,000 steps goals. So a lot of these wearables are going to depend on the idea of big data. And in order for big data to have the value proposition delivered, you have to originally have the big data. And so I would say with the wearables in veterinary health, they're out there, we just don't know what the data means that they're collecting yet because we haven't created the big data set, and we haven't done the proper analysis on it yet. So it's a really interesting area that as more wearables come about, more data gets available and correlated. I think they can deliver a lot more promise in the future.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I've seen some of this on the livestock side where companies that are seeking access and growth of data because that's informative as to results when it comes to, I mean, some interestingly on an environmental front of less pollution in the industry, but also better quality and consistency out of animals. I think it's similar here. I assume some of these are the combination of, is there value from the product offering, or is part of it I need to get the product offered so I can gather data, and the data is something that I can then use to create value with separate and apart from the underlying device.
Yeah, it's a classic chicken and an egg, and unfortunately, at this point in time, yeah, we need people to use these devices before there's really a lot of value generated for that particular patient or pet owner. So a lot of the current wearables try to offer a lot of information on their app just about general pet care. They try to do some gamification to keep people engaged and putting data into the app for collection. But, as all other industries right now, my gosh, the amount of value that can be derived from collecting data is huge. And we're just not quite there yet.
Right. And I think one thing maybe to round out on this topic, we haven't used the term that seems to me necessary for any interaction these days, or AI. And the notion of the value of data will increase, certainly in the R&D side of the house, but also in situations like this, where again, amassing the data is a necessary input to the application of the algorithms and compute to try and get to the outcome. So it seems like it's likely we're going to see all the more evolution.
Yeah, finding the pattern in that big data is the key. And
Exactly.
that's where AI, in my understanding as a veterinarian, can be very helpful. But, a lot of, I think a lot of animal health companies are starting to use AI to help their teams internally. And I saw a notice a month or so ago that FDA on the human side is starting to investigate how FDA might themselves use AI. And so we're sort of wondering, when we now put a submission, and to the best of our knowledge, CVM has not stated whether they are or are not intending to use AI internally. But the conversation we've talked about is we put in a large, most of our submissions are 500 to 1,000 pages, and they're pretty challenging for the CVM reviewers to digest all of that information. So are they literally going to feed our submission into an AI tool that helps CVM? So we've kind of wondered, like, oh gosh, if we move to using AI and they use AI, what if our AI systems generate different outputs? So it's on our minds. How will FDA start to use AI themselves?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's going to be interesting to see this propagate across the business for sure. So I think now we can shift into the channel offerings. If we move to the next slide, mindful in our last 10 minutes here to kind of cover, and we've done a little bit earlier, but the vet distribution, the retail and the direct to consumer. But in the veterinary space, maybe speak a little bit, Nancy, as we covered earlier, the network of reaching the independent vets as opposed to through the corporates, and what that looks like for a company like TriPaw that's trying to sell into the veterinary network.
Yeah, so if TriPaw is literally a brand new stand up, the it is difficult to reach those distributed, what would be 78% of the hospitals that are not corporatized yet. You need individual salespeople to visit those hospitals, and so there's still a large barrier to what I would consider new entrants to come into animal health and be able to access the large geographic area that the United States presents. Clearly, if you partner with a corporate hospital, you can talk to the central leadership. You can, if your product can fit into a KPI for like a preventative care product, where the central business can say, okay, we will partner TriPaw with you on this preventive care, and we'll deliver 20% penetration if you give us a 20% discount. So there's a lot of ways that the corporates and the pharmaceutical companies can partner in order to grow both businesses much more efficiently and effectively. But still, here in the United States, that's a minority of the practices that are out there. So that entry into launching an animal health company is still a little bit of a challenge in the U.S. from that perspective. But the corporates are very meaningful to most all of us pharmaceutical companies, because of their ability to, some of them have restricted pharmacy portfolios that their practices can purchase from. So if you happen to be one of the pharmaceutical companies that provides a lot of the therapeutics to those corporate practices, you're oftentimes not having to compete within the practice level with your competitors. You're competing only at gaining the contract in the first place with the corporate management. So it can be, as with all things of that nature, it can be to your advantage, but it also, as a pharmaceutical company, you have to watch to make sure that it's not diminishing your margin to an extent where that partnership is no longer deriving a lot of value for you. Yes, it might be placing units, and units might get sold, but are you selling them at a margin that's adding value to your own business?
Yeah, that's great. And maybe a good segue now if we move to the retails part of the business. So if we pick up on the vet side, where it's more of a potential for corporate sale and a little competition on price, in the retail space, we've got some more analogs that move more towards branding and getting more of the pull rather than the push, if you will, as to the product offering. So what does the landscape look like between private label and white label and that opportunity on a retail? I imagine that having a branded product that has identity in the business is nice and valuable for better sale value.
Yeah, we always want to try to keep our products in our label, no matter, where it ends up at, because then you're building your own brand. But there are some of the retail platforms that prefer to have products in their own labeling. And so then as a pharmaceutical company, for us, we just need to decide whether, again, is it worth the relationship to take a product that we know works and delivers the right benefit to the pet? Is it worth it to us to offer a white label? Because generally they are, you don't have as much margin on them. It increases the difficulty for our supply chain teams, because now they're making the same product but putting it into two different labels or two different presentations. If somebody wants a 16-ounce bottle versus an 8-ounce bottle on a different platform. So for us as pharmaceutical companies, that white label offering adds complexity and may not deliver the added value again. So can we sell enough units to where we get a payback on the decreased margin and the increased complexity of having that relationship? But it is you need to partner with somebody who helps you get either screen time with your pet owners, shelf space with your pet owners. So we have to be kind of picky about who we do partner with to ensure that they actually have access to the customers that we're looking for.
I was going to say on that, Nancy, and it links a little to your comments on the veterinary space, but the doing partnerships with retailers, so it's not just kind of traditional consumer product of a fight for shelf space. That's part of it for the folks, but there may be areas where there could be collaboration or perhaps even co-branding, as I assume.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the brands that are now retail brands started as veterinary only brands. Advantage flea medicine would be a great example that was only sold to veterinarians for the first few years or decade of its sales, but now it's almost entirely a retail product. Greenie's Dental Treats would be another good example. Large brand, started only as being available through veterinarians. And so some brands do specifically take a goal of going into the veterinary hospital, establishing the brand and the value within the veterinary space, and then they move into more of a retail channel if from a regulatory perspective, the product can be.
Yeah. Yeah, and with that, I think with our time left, and we've got another analog of moving from retail to direct to consumer. I'm sure there's some other parallels of kind of maintaining the brand value, maybe the trusted by vets notion, bringing it into direct to consumer. But maybe on this end, we can talk a bit to the generational side of how people are getting their items as we wrap up here with a few minutes left.
Yeah, I think as all industries, as we look, the younger generation becomes a larger portion of your customer base. We all need to be very mindful of how they receive information, who are their trusted partners, where do they look to when their pet is sick. It is shifting over time. In my generation, everybody just called the vet and asked the vet a question. Now there's multiple other opportunities for the pet owner to access that information. So all animal pharmaceutical companies, nutrition companies are looking for ways to better interact with the newer generations and what works for them. How do they want to digest information? Where do they want to receive it? When do they want to receive it? And then how do they want to interact with you? If you're for TriPaw's veterinary hospitals, we're all used to being able to go on an app and schedule an appointment. We all expect that we get text reminders and email reminders. And so there's a lot to be looked at as to how do you engage with customers in all areas of TriPaw's business.
Terrific. Yeah, thank you so much. Well, we've obviously covered a lot of bases and hopefully whet people's appetite for going into deeper areas within the business of TriPaw. But I think for items we've covered, we certainly open to questions. I think people can put them in the chat. And we can also give you the code one more time of value 2025 if CLE is top of mind, value 2025. But certainly let us know if you've got questions. And we absolutely invite you and invite others to come back for future sessions as well.
And with the questions, if you don't have any now, feel free to email us. And Jim and Nancy, thank you very much for just a fascinating and insightful discussion about these various issues. And we'll continue to learn about TriPaw in the months to come. These are the upcoming sessions. Our very next one will be on the 8th of January, where we will talk about different regulatory schemes to create different opportunities with our partners, Todd Harrison and Justin Cohen. We talked some today about the FDA. They are able to provide really very valuable insights into that world. So straight up the top of the hour, we thank you again for participating, those of you in the audience, and thanks again to Nancy and Jim for your insights. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.